Hey there, Mike here again. Welcome to my channel. You know the rules. Have fun and hope you learn something. Subscribe if you want. Like the video if you want. Pass it around. I don't get anything out of it. I just like to see if these are useful to you. Anyway, today's video is going to be on plasma cutters and air compressors. I've been getting a lot of questions lately from viewers and from friends about how much air do you actually need for an air compressor for your plasma cutter. They see things, well, it needs like 2 CFM or 4 CFM or 8 CFM, or and sometimes they make them in liters, but you get the idea, and there's a lot of confusion here. So hopefully this video is going to be able to explain it all to you, and it's not rocket science, but with all the marketing hype and stuff on compressors and then what they write on plasma cutters, how much you need, it can get really confusing. But I'm sure I can make this through, and I'm gonna show you physically with some parts here the logic behind all this. But and first, though, I do want to put a shout out to a company that makes my plasma cutter, BestArc. They are, when it comes to consumer grade plasma cutters, they are the best. You can look around at all the different companies and reviews, and even on Amazon, BestArc is like the #1 seller. Mike Festiva, Pete from Pete's Tools Down Under, they love it. I mean, it's their greatest, most favorite also. Let me show it to you, and then we'll get on with the information about the air compressors. So this is my BestArc BTC 500 DP. This is the generation 2. They have a generation 7. Either one you buy is a great deal. The 7 is running right now on sale on Amazon for about $200. The model generation 2 is about $180. The only real difference is on the Gen 7, it's all digital. It's all push button. It's all digital display. I personally like the Gen 2 because I prefer having a manual air gauge, because with any air tool, when you pull the trigger, you know how the air pressure will go down. That's your working pressure versus static, where it just shows up. And I prefer to be able to see that. It's easier to see that. But other than that, the Gen 7 also has 2T and 4T on it, which means 2T is normal. You pull the trigger, it works. You let go of the trigger, it stops. 4T, you push the trigger and let go, it's still working. Great if you're into real intricate plasma cutting art, like you're making art figures or signs or something like that, or if you're using it on a CNC table or something. This way you don't have to hold the button down. It just continues to cut until you push it again, and then it turns off. I don't really have a need for that right now, so I like this. But other than that, they're both about the same. Great deals. BestArc. I mean, check them out. They're great. Okay, so let's get into this air compressor thing. You have to understand, when you see an air compressor and they are advertising it's 2 CFM or 4 CFM or 5 CFM or whatever the CFM, that is how much volume of air the compressor, the actual compressor, can put out air to fill up the tank. So an 8 CFM tank compressor, let's say it's just a 20-gallon tank, 30, 40, 60, it doesn't matter. It fills that up and it can fill that tank with 8 cubic feet per minute of air filling that tank. So that means it can fill that tank twice as fast as, say, a 4 CFM, same size tank and everything. Now, once the tank is filled, the CFM of that compressor is irrelevant because it's not working anymore, right? The tank's full. The CFM of how much air can go through the hoses of your air compressor, we'll call it the air compressor, but the hose is going off to your tool, that has nothing to do with the CFM of the compressor anymore. Now, an average 3/8 inch air hose, which is standard size air hose, at 90 psi, it can push out almost 20 to 25 CFM. So your tool's going to get all the air it needs from the hose and everything. Of course, that depends also on the regulator, because every piece is going to bottleneck it a little bit. Now, on a cheap $250 air compressor, the regulator in there is not full flow. It's going to put out enough air. It's probably putting out about 4 or 5 CFM, even though the hose can handle 20. But trying to get it through the ports of that regulator, it slows down. And then you have your connectors, and then if you have an air dryer, desiccant, water traps, that all slows it down too and all. But generally speaking, you're going to get all the air through that you need. Now, there are some tools that need a lot of high CFM. For instance, we have an impact wrench. Now, for this to run at 100% full steam, it wants 6 CFM of air. Now, like I said, your hose can handle it and all. A lot of the smaller compressors, the regulator might be a bottleneck, but you're not going to notice it too much on there. But in theory, if this needs 6 CFM, this impact wrench, and let's say by chance that your compressor can put out 6 CFM, then you set it for, say, 95 PSI or 90 PSI for the tool. And when you pull the trigger and you're using it and your tank's, say, it's sitting at 135 or 150 PSI, because that's what its max is. When it starts to come down and you're using the air, it hits around 95 and your compressor kicks back in to start up. Because your compressor can do 6 CFM and your impact wrench wants 6 CFM, assuming your regulator could put out at max air volume, in theory, you don't have to stop working. You could keep on working 24/7 because your air compressor is making as much air going into that tank that your tool is taking out. And you could look right at that 95 PSI that's on the gauge on your compressor where it kicked back in, and it would stay right there because you're using as much as you're providing. But in reality, most of us don't have air compressors putting out that much. Some of us do. You get into, when you're starting to pay $1,000 plus on air compressors, you can get 6, 8 CFM type compressors, 11 CFM, of course. But of course, you wouldn't want to be running this 24/7 either, though, because most air compressors have a duty cycle. They're not designed to be just pumping 24/7. They're set at like 60% or something, or 70%, where, it runs for like 6 minutes and then it wants at least 4 minutes of cool down time, But in theory, the whole thing about this video is about the CFMs. In theory, if it was a compressor that could make 6 cubic feet per minute of air going into the tank and your tool was using 6 cubic feet per minute of air, you would not get below your 95 PSI. It would just, or 90, whatever the kick-in startup again was. It would just be using it as fast as it could be putting it in, and that's great. So when a lot of tools mention what they want in the CFM, the tank can provide it. Assuming your regulator's halfway decent, it can provide it. The hoses definitely can provide it. They can provide up to 25 CFM. So it's just a matter of, can it do it? Now, for most of us who have a 4 CFM, 5 CFM, 3 CFM, little pancakes, 2 CFM, whatever, air compressor, all that means is, okay, you're using it, the tool, then all of a sudden it hits that kick on, you sort of have to stop, take a break, whatever, until it fills back up, because you're going to use the air faster than the compressor can make the compressor so it can fill up the tank again. So what does that have to do now with the plasma cutter? You see some of them say, oh, it wants 5 CFM or 8 CFM, like the new BestArc. It talks about 250 liters per minute, do the calculations, that comes out to 8.82 CFM. In theory, if you wanted that plasma cutter to keep cutting nonstop forever and ever, and even when the compressor kicked back in, you'd need to have a compressor that was able to fill the air faster than you can use it. Now, as I mentioned, you don't want your compressor staying on all that time, but does that plasma cutter really need 8 CFM? This is all the marketing hype, and this is stuff that they're just trying to make it so you don't have to pause. They're trying to tell you what they recommend. But now we have to get into reality, and here's reality. See this? This is the nozzle of a plasma cutter. This is what's on the end of the gun. This is what air and the fire, the plasma is shooting out of. I want you, I don't know if you can get close enough, but you see that little hole in the middle? That little hole is the orifice for this nozzle. Do you know what the size of that hole is? They make basically two sizes. Normal for 220 volt type ones. This is 0.045 inches. They also make a 0.030 inches. But using the 0.045 as the standard here, do you know what the CFM through that hole is? It's 1.53 CFM. I don't care how much you look at all these other specs, that hole, that physical hole, cannot pass more than 1.53 CFM, cubic feet per minute of air. It's physically impossible. Think about a garden hose. You take a garden hose and you don't have a nozzle on it, you just turn the water on. That's full volume, but no pressure, okay? Very little pressure. Hot summer day, you cool off your face with a garden hose and everybody's happy. Put a nozzle on that thing where it's a real high pressure stream, very low volume, but very high pressure. Put that against your face, it's gonna hurt like an SOB. So my point here is this air, you've got your plasma cutter set for 60, 65 PSI. That's pretty much the norm. A little less if you're cutting at lower amperage. The max volume this thing can put out is 1.53 cubic feet per minute of air. So when you see them talking about, it wants a 8 CFM or a 5 CFM for your plasma cutter. No, it doesn't. Okay, you don't need that much. So what do we need to know now about this? Okay, with your air compressor, if you have a high CFM air compressor, that means you're going to be able to fill up your tank faster. And so you've been plasma cutting and everything, and all of a sudden, after about a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, which is a really long time in plasma cutting, believe it or not. Doesn't sound like it's a long time, but it's a long time. Air compressor kicks back in. Okay, you stop, you let it fill, gives you a chance to regroup, get your metal set up for the next cut you're making or whatever. If you have a high CFM compressor, it's going to fill up that tank faster. Boom, you get back into it. Now on the other side of this, what's the difference when you have like a 20, 30 gallon tank or a 60 gallon air compressor tank versus say a little 5 gallon or 10 gallon pancake tank or small tank like that? Well, that's how long you can actually do in the cutting part. You got how long can you cut before it kicks back in, and how long do you have to wait till it fills back up? That's where the CFM and volume come in, and capacity. So what we should learn from all this now is having a higher CFM air compressor, that just means you're going to be able to fill up your tank faster and get back to work. Having a larger tank means you can work longer before the compressor kicks back in and you have to wait till it fills up till you can get back to work. Easy way to explain this would be let's say a 2 CFM 5-gallon compressor, little, pancake 5-gallon, and it's 2 CFM. And let's say you can cut for about 20 seconds, which is still a pretty good amount of cutting. So you can cut for about 20 seconds, air compressor kicks back in, boom. It's 2 CFM, and it takes, say, 4 minutes till it fills back up again, or 3 minutes. We'll just say 3 minutes, fills back up, boom. Then you can go, you cut for 30 seconds, takes 3 minutes to fill back up. Now, let's say you have a 4 CFM. It would only take about a minute and a half, same 5-gallon. It'd take a minute and a half for it to fill back up instead of 3 minutes. And if you happen to have a 20-gallon tank instead of a 5-gallon tank, now instead of only cutting for about 30 seconds, you're able to cut for, say, about a minute and a half, which is a long time of cutting. So you can cut for about a minute and a half before it kicks back in at 90, and being you're only set for 60 or 65, you don't have to really worry. You could actually go a little bit beyond when it kicks in. If you're on your last few inches, you can keep cutting because you still got over the 60, 65 PSI that you need. You're set, it's kicking in at 90, 95, and you're only using 60, 65. But here you can go a minute and a half or so of cutting. And because it's a 4 CFM on a 20-gallon tank, it's going to fill it up in about the same amount of time as a 2 CFM would have done a 10-gallon tank. I think you're understanding the numbers here, the logic behind it. So like I said, you've got this little nozzle with that hole in it, and that thing can only pass 1.53 CFM. So it's not a matter of, will your compressor work? All compressors will work on a consumer grade plasma cutter. Any of them will. It's just a matter of how long can you cut before the compressor kicks in, and how long do you have to wait till it's topped back off. The bigger the tank, the longer you can cut before it kicks back in. The higher the CFM, the less time you have to wait till it's filled back up. That's it, okay? So you've got yourself a little 1 CFM 5-gallon pancake. You can cut, it's going to work fine. It's not going to not work. It will work, okay? Because that hose and everything is going to pass more than that 1.5 CFM that this thing needs, okay? It's going to give you more than enough air to get to there. It's just, okay, you only get to cut 20 seconds, 30 seconds, which is still a pretty good amount of time depending on what you're cutting. Then you rearrange while it spends the next 3 minutes or so topping off the tank. And if you happen to have a good sized tank, 20 gallons or so, and you've got the typical would be about a 4 CFM 20-gallon tank. That's pretty much an average. That's your Harbor Freights. That's your Cobalt over at Lowe's, things like that. 4 CFM 20-gallon, that's kind of like the mid-range of things. You're going to be able to cut for a minute and a half to 2 minutes at your, depending on how much air pressure you're using. I use 60 to 65 for my normal thick cuts. I use around 45 to 50 PSI for like 18 gauge or, artwork and stuff like that, where I don't need. So anywhere from a minute and a half to 2 minutes, which is a really long time. I mean, that is intricate. No problem. It kicks back in. I lay down the torch, readjust my metal. 2-3 minutes later, I'm ready. It's already topped off. Matter of fact, my compressor, my 20-gallon, from cut in time to cut out time, from getting that 135, hits down to 95, kicks back in. That only takes, I average about 1 minute 20 seconds before it tops back off. So I mean, it's not a big deal, and it's a 4 CFM, and I have max flow going through all my hoses, my connectors, my regulator, all that. So the plasma cutter doesn't care. I mean, it's going to use the amount of air it needs at 1.53 CFM, because that's all that nozzle could pass, whether it likes it or not. So Hope this makes sense. Okay. Hope I didn't become too repetitive here, but I really wanted to emphasize this. So, hey, hope it helps. Check out my other videos. I've got them on the plasma cutter for some tips and tricks on it, on how to get better. I have them on welding equipment, air compressors. If you want to know about the CFM versus PSIs versus all that, I've got a pretty good video on that with charts and stuff. And, pass it around and come back soon. And I've always got something coming along. So have a great day. Take care.